Fall has finally arrived. It seemed like it would never get here, and it sure does feel good. And it also means that winter is not far behind. Well, most of us think about putting our gardens and our landscapes pretty much to bed for the winter and not having a whole lot of interest out there. However, with a little bit of planning, you can actually add plant materials to your landscape that provide a lot of winter interest. And today I wanted to talk to you about a few of the trees that serve this purpose very well. Now, the first tree I wanted to talk to you about is actually native to the eastern part of the United States, clear up to the eastern part of Oklahoma, and that is the river birch. Now, the river birch is usually found growing along rivers and streams in moister areas, and it is a really beautiful tree with kind of a spreading branch pattern on the top. And also you'll notice that the trunk is usually a multi-stemmed trunk. It can look a lot better when you train it that way. Now, the interesting part about this tree for winter interest is that the bark is really beautiful. On the younger twigs, you can see it's kind of a reddish to brown color with a lot of tiny gray lenticels on it. But as we move back up here, if we get to branches that are over about 2 inches in diameter, what happens is the bark actually starts to exfoliate, and it reveals this pretty lighter tan bark underneath. Now, this is actually a cultivar. This is heritage, and it has more of this exfoliating bark pattern than the actual species does. So it is a very nice tree for the winter landscape. Now, this tree likes to be grown in either full sun or just a little bit of shade, and it is a good tree for Oklahoma. Now, it does have one slight problem. If we have a drought situation, it can be aided quite a bit by a little bit of supplemental water. If you plant this in an area where it's by a pond or maybe by a stream or something, you probably won't have this problem. Also, it tends to drop its leaves if it gets very hot and drought stressed. It doesn't mean it's dead. It just kind of goes into that dormant state and drops its leaves, and many times it will even refoliate for the fall. So it doesn't mean that the tree is dying, it's just how it deals with a stress situation. So again, this is a very good tree to add some winter interest to your landscape. Now, another tree with absolutely beautiful exfoliating bark is the paperbark maple. And we actually have one of these planted here at the Oklahoma Gardening Studio grounds underneath some of our large pecan trees. Now, the paperbark maple, or Acer griseum, is actually a much smaller tree. It only grows to about 25 feet tall with a spread of about 15 to 20 feet. It grows very slowly, and it's a spreading tree with dark green leaves. Now, the leaves are actually compound with 3 leaflets, and in themselves are a very pretty look during the summer. The tree also has nice fall color as the leaves turn an orange to reddish orange color. But the great thing about this tree is the beautiful, rich brown peeling bark. Now, this is a definite addition to the landscape because you can see how the texture of this bark changes. There's some very nice shiny areas of bark and also the rich, deep brown color. So this is a wonderful addition for the winter landscape. Now, this tree needs to be planted in a more protected area in the shade in Oklahoma, and you can see here it's planted under several large pecan trees. In your own landscape, you could plant it in an area that would be similar to where you might put a Japanese maple, where it is sheltered either on the north or east side of a structure because it does need shade. Now, this isn't a large tree, but it does make a very nice specimen tree for your landscape. Well, as we're talking about trees with exfoliating or peeling bark, a very good candidate for the winter landscape is the lacebark elm. Now, this is a beautiful large tree. Again, it can get anywhere from 40 to 60 feet tall with a spread of about that many feet. So it's a tree for a larger area. It has a nice oval shaped crown and tends to have a more open or vase shape to it with arching stems as the tree matures. Now, the leaves on this tree are very nice. They're a smaller elm leaf and they're shiny. So while it has its leaves, it's a beautiful tree, but it is also a beautiful tree during the wintertime. And the reason for this is the exfoliating bark, which is where it gets its common name. And you can see here that we start out with a grayish to green bark that starts to peel off as you get into the older wood to reveal a very nice tan. It almost looks like a chamois. It's a very soft wood underneath, and this is an absolutely beautiful feature of this tree. Now we have a mature specimen of this tree located in the Arboretum, and you can see just how striking the bark pattern is on this tree. Now, in addition to being a very good tree for the winter landscape, it's just a nice tree all around because it is pretty tough. It can withstand poor and compacted soils, and it's also one of the elms that is highly resistant to Dutch elm disease, so it's a good candidate for your landscape. Well, we've got a couple of other trees that are good for the winter landscape, and we're going to show you those in the Centennial Grove. Well, we're here at the Centennial Grove, which is actually part of the OVGA complex, but instead of being located at the headquarters gardens where the Oklahoma Gardening Studio Gardens are, we're actually on the west edge of campus. It's where Western goes around the curve and turns into Hall of Fame, and there's a very nice collection of trees here to look at, and they're all labeled, so if you're in Stillwater sometime and you'd like to stroll through the Centennial Grove, it's a very nice place to visit. Well, one of the trees that I wanted to show you is right here, and this is the Cedar Elm. Now, the Cedar Elm is another larger tree. It can get anywhere from 50 to 70 feet tall. While this one isn't that large yet, we have to remember how large it's going to get in the end, because we have to give our trees room to grow so that we don't have to cut them down or prune them severely because we've run out of space. Now, this is a great tree for Oklahoma because it actually is very tolerant of compacted or heavy clay soils, and it's tolerant of clay soils that can be moist in the spring and in the fall because of rain, and those are exactly the conditions that many parts of Oklahoma experience. So it is a good tree for Oklahoma. It's also a nice tree because of the winter interest, and I'll show you what I'm talking about here. It actually develops some corky wings along the sides of the young branches here, and you can see these, how they've developed right here. Now, we don't have as many corky wings as the winged elm, but you do see them as you look throughout the tree, and there's a few more right up here, and as we look back at the center of the tree, you can still see that being carried out on some of the older branches. Now, as the bark gets older, it develops a more deeply fissured bark, and it's a dark gray. So that is a nice color in the winter against a snowy or light colored backdrop. Also, the tree tends to be very twiggy, and so as it loses its leaves, it has a very fine texture to it. So this is another good candidate for a winter landscape. Now, we have one more tree to look at, and that's the Japanese pagoda tree, and we're going to go see that right now. Well, the last tree that I wanted to show you today is, again, the Japanese pagoda tree, or Sephora japonica, and this is another great tree for the winter landscape. Now, it can grow anywhere from 40 to 80 feet tall, and it has nice green compound leaves during the summer. And in the fall, it gets these nice 2 to 4 inch long seed pods that hang on it, and they actually look somewhat like beads strung together. Now, these start out green and then turn yellow and finally turn brown. And this adds to the winter interest of the tree because they will persist on the tree for a very long time. Now, another part of the tree that's great that I'm going to show you over here on one of our larger trees is that the bark on this is really pretty. Here I've got a branch. The young bark, up to about 5 years old, is actually a beautiful green color, kind of a shiny color, and then you see these small gray lenticels dotted in here, and when this doesn't have leaves, you still have a nice green effect in the landscape. Now, as we move back and look at the older bark, it too is interesting. We can see as the bark gets older, it actually turns a tan to gray and actually kind of has a burlappy type pattern to it. Now, you can see here the contrast between the green stems and the tan stems, which is a very nice combination for our winter landscape. Now, where some of our other trees were very tolerant of poor soils, the Japanese pagoda tree actually needs a good soil. However, it is tolerant of restricted root areas and is extremely tolerant of smoke and atmospheric pollution, which makes it a good urban tree. Well, these are just a few of the trees that can add some interest to your winter landscape. And since we're in prime tree planting time for Oklahoma, you might think about adding one of these to your own landscape. Well, Speaking of prime planting time, it's also time to plant bulbs in Oklahoma, and we're going to do that right now.